Okay, cool. Does MJ have co-host so she can share her screen?
Yeah, I can share.
Okay, so should we get started and just let people join as we go?
Absolutely.
You find the bulk of the people join after the kickoff time. It's kind of that moment. Oh, it's supposed to be somewhere. Anyway, welcome to everybody that's here this afternoon for another Community Connect session. We are only doing them once a month now, which is probably some relief to some of us because we don't need to provide that much support regularly as we were doing during the first wave of COVID. But I think it's something that's important because I think that SAPEX represents community and we need to keep our people close and bring them in and just keep on nurturing our supply chain professionals. So this is what we enjoy doing and we are very pleased to have you as members and our support. So today we are going to talk about the aftermath of the riots and looting on our supply chains. And we are very privileged today to have MJ Schumacher, the SAPEX president, with us to share her expertise. She has been hunted down by various radio stations and TV stations for her insights following the riots. And Jeremy Baskin, he is ex-South African, but is working in the UK at the moment. Many years of experience under the belt. So you're in really good hands. And I think this is going to be a very interesting conversation. There's some interesting information that's come out as a result of some surveys that have been done on the riots and looting. So without further ado, I will let MJ and Jeremy do some introductions. And if they would like to pick on people in the audience to ask them to say, how's it? They are most welcome to do that too. So MJ and Jeremy, you guys take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Tanya. Let me share my screen. Everybody can see it, just say yes.
Yes.
Okay. I'm just going to put it into presentation mode. So I have, can you still see it? Because sometimes Apple does weird things. Perfect. Okay, well, thanks everyone and thanks Tanya for inviting us to this Community Connect. I think it's a great initiative because we all get a chance to talk about things that are happening at the moment. And, you know, the choice of subject today, I think is very, very prevalent. We're still feeling the aftermath. There's still many things that need to happen. So I'm very pleased that Jeremy and I get a chance to talk to you. And we're also going to be asking you for some insights. It's not just us, it's a dialogue that we want to have today. But we do have some interesting information from surveys that were done straight after the looting, just to give you a sense of what the picture looks like. Let's paint the picture and see what was the actual impact. I think some of us who are not in KwaZulu-Natal, who weren't close to it in Gauteng, when you see the pictures, you think, oh, a couple of shopping centers, but that actually wasn't the case. It was a lot bigger than we realized. So who wants to say hello first? Otherwise, I'm going to have to pick on someone. So Lizelle and James, you've said a couple of things. Vasu.
Yes.
You want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Vasu. I head up supply chain for ARB Electrical. Yeah, and I think you're quite right. Let me turn on my video. Let me not be rude. Yeah, I think you're quite right. The impact is certainly quite heavy in Intel. We did some interesting things during that period to keep our supply chain going, arm guards and all of that. Mm-hmm. From an impact point of view, our IT operation was completely burnt in Nandi Drive, their buildings. So their building was completely taken out. But yeah, fortunately, our DR plan, etc., worked as planned, and we were able to have non-interrupted operation. But yeah, welcome. I just want to get everybody's insight as well on how they were impacted, and I think where to next, and as well as how do we prepare better for the future.
Thanks, Vasu. I think Jeremy and I will touch on a couple of those points. So happy to see you're alive and well. You know, material damage is terrible, but people damage is worse. So good that we can see you here. So as mentioned, we're going to talk about the looting and the riots. These pictures, you know, these are pictures I think we've all seen on the media. I still, you know, my chin drops when I see this every single time, and to think it's actually in our own country. But yeah, it's a fact. It's something that happened. So if we just look at the impact of those looting, so 20% of GDP is 70 billion, and we lost 14 billion. So this is not a small thing that happened. And the growth forecast has been adjusted down to 3.8. So this is something, you know, when you just see numbers like that, then you ask yourself, how big was it really? And it was big. The cost to the national economy, 50 billion. 50,000 informal traders and 40,000 businesses were impacted. And you know, when a business gets impacted directly, there's always a chain. We all know that, right? I don't need to tell that to supply chain professionals, that when one part of the chain gets impacted, there's a whole domino effect along the lines. 150,000 jobs at risk. We know that that's the last thing we need in South Africa. 200 malls targeted. So it's not just a couple, it was 200 malls and 1,200 retail outlets impacted or damaged. So not a small event. And what does that mean? The supply chains get stretched. I think you all know that very well. As I said before, if something happens, one part of the chain falls over, everyone has to scramble and try and fix it. And this is then what we normally call this an event, right? When we do forecasting, demand management, we say it's an event and we must manage it. But I don't think an event of this size or surprise was actually expected at any time whatsoever. There was a survey done, and I thought this might be interesting for all of you, that there was a survey done between the 27th of July and the 29th of July. And they surveyed 598 respondees, of which 5 didn't respond. So there was 593 responses that they got within 2 days. And it was really quite interesting to see. I'm just going to show a couple of snapshots of what the outcome was. So if we look at the impact on the businesses, they were saying that most of the respondents had between 2 and 10 employees. You can see the 232 out of those 593 were quite small businesses. So small businesses is always interesting, because one of the graphs that I haven't showed you is they speak about insurance, how many of you were insured. But you can see that actually most of the businesses with over a turnover of in an excess of 10 million were the ones that were impacted the most as well. So it's quite interesting to see, because you think, okay, there's 2 to 10 employees. You think, oh, maybe the turnover is here somewhere, but actually the majority, it was over a 10 million Rand revenue turnover for those companies. If we look at the loss of stock and inventory, there were 30% of the businesses were affected by loss of stock or inventory. And I think that talks a bit to what Vasu said. It's, everything was burnt down, or there was damage and destruction of equipment. So those were the 2 main ones that was the impact of that looting. There was also various others, and even the one where they say others, we tend to ignore others, but it is in number 4, which is inability to travel, cancellation by customers. So you just closed a deal and then you can't deliver, right? So you lose money, you lose revenue. If we look at this one, it does very nicely to show these are the smaller businesses. These are the bigger businesses, but you can see the impact on the loss of stock and inventory is not that different. It doesn't matter what size your business is. That was one of the main impacts that they had. What you'll see here, though, the green one is damage to or destruction to buildings. And you will see that the smaller businesses with the smaller turnover, the damage was bigger. And if you have to imagine someone who has a 0 to 500,000, that could be a street vendor, right? So they lost everything. I mean, basically the shop was looted and burned down. So this type of table is always very interesting to get the context, to get a good understanding, okay, what was the impact really and who were hit the hardest. But if you look across here, especially on the loss of inventory, I think they're quite close to each other. So everybody felt the same. There wasn't one having less of inventory loss than the other. I'm not going to go through all the others. I think, I don't know if the slides are shared with you, but they can be if you so wish. What does that mean? So as I said earlier, the balance between the supply and demand, that balance we're always looking for. We all know that this area is the sweet spot. That's where we want it to work. And if this was perfect, we all wouldn't have a job. because that means supply and demand are equal, and we don't have to balance anything. So the balance has been completely disrupted. The supply has been impacted because many of the shops don't have stock anymore. The demand has been impacted because obviously those shops don't exist anymore. The demand is going to shift somewhere else. You're still going to have people that need food, and they will then stream to other shopping centers. And that's what you saw, where people were lining up, standing in queues, and then comes in the famous allocation, right? Where you say, okay, you can't go and stockpile. And that was some of the main things that I spoke about when I was interviewed on TV and radio. Because everyone suddenly said we better stockpile because we have a food shortage. South Africa does not have a food shortage. There's enough food. It's about where it's distributed. So if people start stockpiling, I mean, you know very well that just causes even more chaos within the supply chain, and there's a complete imbalance. And often people that stockpile are financially better off versus the ones that can only buy food every day. And then you're impacting them even more because they can't stockpile. They just don't have the possibility to do that. Is there anything in these graphs that spoke to any of you where you say it contradicts what happened to you or to your business?
So I guess one of the interesting things is that it's very business dependent. So from our perspective, we were impacted by the riots, but not on a financial perspective. It was more on a delay perspective. We had machines that were stuck in Durban Harbour, which couldn't get moved up to Johannesburg because of the closure of the roads. Yeah. But I think we were very fortunate in terms of not having any physical damage to goods. I sympathize with the gentleman in Queen Nandi Drive. I think we were one of the very, very fortunate companies is that we seem to have literally been bypassed on that little rampage down that road. But yeah, I think very much the type of goods that you're responsible for really, really impacts you in terms of how critically you may have been hurt by this.
Mm. And I think a lot of people spoke about, food and petrol and these type of things, but we shouldn't forget manufacturing. So there's raw materials as well. So the manufacturing line is standing still. And we all know if we have a background in the manufacturing production environment, that is the worst thing that can happen. You don't want your line to stand ever. So that is also, again, the domino effect of what happened. So basically out of stock, a lot of out of stocks. We all know that in the supply chain world, that KPI is like the holy grail. You don't touch it. You never have an out of stock. It's just unheard of. And for a supply chain person, this is really the worst that can happen to you. But of course, it's also about what do you do about it? What do you put in place to try and solve this issue? So some additional findings I thought you might, it talks to a little bit, James, what you said about the roads, right, and the infrastructure. So, transport businesses, the security, talking about the N3 was closed when it opened again. Where are the police? Where's the army? Who's going to help us? Even before the looting happened, we already had that problem of trucks being targeted. And there's a need for protection of those businesses. And then the safe transportation of medicines. I think one of the things, I work a little bit in the global public health sector, and one of the things is that they even didn't have syringes for the vaccines. And remember, some of the vaccines are cold chain. So, if something has been looted or there's no electricity, you can throw away all those vaccines. There's no ways that you can actually just try and recover them. And also from a perspective of the chronic patients. So I don't know if you're all aware of the program that the public health sector has called CCMDD, where all the chronic stable patients who are 60% HIV patients, but there are others, hypertension, etc., they go to pickup points. They go to the Dis-Chems. They can choose to go to a Clicks. They can choose to go to what we call a Pele box. It's a little locker. And if we just look at the impact of those patients, and when you're chronic, that means you cannot stop taking your medication. 300,000 patients were impacted because they could not go where they needed to go to get their medication. The Click stores, the medication, the packages were lying on the ground. You cannot pick up a package and just call the patient and say, come get your package. You don't know what's happened to that medication. You basically have to destroy it. So this is also an impact that I think we often forget about. but something that is very, very important. So transportation, talking again to what James said, if you can't transport goods, you can't unload containers. And there was a big discussion also about the citrus fruit, right? That has to have active cooling. So if we can, I'll give you a little bit of a context of what that meant for the Port of Durban, because we also then had the Transnet IT disruption, I still call it, so we know better. And then Jeremy's going to talk a little bit to how he supported that incident to try and help them to get back on track. So Transnet, if you look at the Port of Durban, the 2/3 of the containers go through the Durban port. They manage 5,000 containers a day, which is equivalent to approximately 4.3 billion rand a day. So when the looting happens, they had 6 days delay. Okay, so we're talking like over 30 billion. And then they had the Transnet hacking, we'll put in inverted commas, was another 6 days. So you're talking almost 60 billion rand worth of goods that is compromised. So the fact that Durban stood still for 12 days because of looting and because of this hack, it had a huge impact. And if you remember the billions I mentioned before, and you're saying that the government is going to give us 34 billion, versus the 60 that we lose in 2 weeks. It puts everything a little bit in perspective. $1 billion always sounds a lot to us, but it's actually not big for the economy. So I'm going to hand over to Jeremy, and he's been working very closely with a group of people from the private sector that are looking to see how they can manage the ports and all the backlogs. So you're sitting after 2 weeks with 16,000 containers that are in backlog, and how do you manage something like that? So Jeremy, over to you.
Thanks, MJ. Good afternoon, all. So we've got the presentation over there. Yeah, so we got involved, not only myself, but also Tonya and the SAPEX members as well, to try and help as we did when these issues started happening. How do we help especially the ports recover as quickly as possible from the current situation? Because even though the ports are being affected like everybody else, they also become the blood life to the economy as well, with the amount of product and produce being sent out, but also things coming in from medical supplies to food to critical items as well. So it was about, okay, how do we get this moving as quickly as possible? And the first thing that you always pick up is when you have a situation like this is to understand you need that visibility. And the first question wasn't about, okay, what do we do? The first question was about, let's understand what we currently have in terms of the current situation. And the way that we did that is we put effectively what we call a control tower in place. MJ, I think if you can go to the next slide. Yeah. Okay, great, thanks. So we put a control tower in place, and what that control tower does is it looks at all the items or all the things that make up the control effectively of the port. So we divided it into six elements. So first of all, vessels coming in and coming out, because there's lots of vessels out at sea, and obviously there's a plan for them to come into the port. But coming into the port is one thing, and docking. The other thing is how you get the containers or the products off of it, and how do you transport it, which I'll come to later. The second thing was about the trucks. So particularly, how do we get trucks in to take this away? Because you don't want to bring in a vessel and things just start packing up. And as we know, what we found with the trucks was that there were three main issues with the trucks. First of all, there was a recognition that a large estate of the trucks were vandalized or even burnt. In the region of about 15% of the transport is now gone out of the system through that. Those people who had trucks were saying, well, you know, I don't want to move my truck because if I move it and it's vandalized, the insurance aren't going to pay for it. So they weren't, as well as the fact of the people coming to drive it didn't want to leave their families at home and come and drive it and take that additional risk. So therefore becomes a security risk. And then the third issue was the actual network. So even if we could get trucks into the port and we could get drivers into it, nobody was able to physically drive up to Johannesburg. As James said, he had stuff stuck in the port because the roads were you know, full of tires burning and various issues. So we needed to understand where we were from actually what physical states did we have, what trucks did we have available, and who was prepared to move. And then the third piece came in with the rail, because again, the network of the rails was, you know, who's going to drive the rails, who's going to make sure that we coordinate it, and where are those people at the moment. So we had to look at the rail. The other things that we also needed to understand is storage. So when you take a container off a vessel, you store it on the quayside or the area where it's done. But there's a little realization is it's not only doing it there, because you can't keep all of those. You need to find other locations where we could effectively stage things, as well as the fact that you find that there's quite a lot of refrigerated or chilled or frozen goods that come in. And what generally happens is they come off the vessel and they actually go into other storage locations around the port, around Durban. And again, some of those storage locations had been vandalized or out of operation. So we lost some of that. The fifth thing is the waterside. So the waterside operation is how you physically have cranes to take the containers or the goods off and bring it onto the quay. So again, that requires a number of things. It needs obviously people to man that, and getting people to come to work was an issue. The second thing around that was the fact that the cranes themselves require a high level of maintenance. And therefore, you're finding that you didn't have all of them operating due to two things. One is you didn't have the spares because they were stuck in containers out at sea. And the other thing was the fact that, you know, getting technical people in was also difficult because they wanted to be at home. And then the final one was the landside bit. And the landside bit is how we coordinate the transport in and out effectively of the harbor, and that was a number of things. So it is getting the number of vehicles that we can physically get in and get out, and needs to go through the gate control, and there's quite a strict gate control, but also about how you man that gate control and how you get those in and out. But the other problem being is the road. So in this issue, it wasn't about traffic, because normal operations is about traffic, because the Bayhead area is effectively gridlocked normally, and very difficult to move that, and as well as the N3. But the issue was security issues, that nobody wanted to move through those areas, and also move up the N3 corridors. So what effectively we did is we needed to capture all that information of vessel schedules, trucks, what trucks we had available, rails, how many carriages or that we had available to us, where was our storage estate and what was available with our storage estate, what waterside operations we needed and what landside, and trying to coordinate all of this in one place. Obviously, you've got all these different silos working. The concept was to put a control tower in so we can have complete visibility of all these areas, and therefore try and identify where the backlog is, where do we need support. So getting the security services involved, getting a number of people involved to try and understand where were those backlogs and how could we close them. So it was a really good team in terms of public sector and private sector working together to, first of all, identify where the issues are, and then second of view, coming up with plans to make this move and to get it working again as quickly as possible. So hopefully that gives you a little view of all the different moving parts that you had. And we're now moving into another phase, because that initially we came in to help with the backlog. How do we clear the backlog so we can get back to business? But I think there's been a realization now to say, oh, this is really helpful, because we don't have this information. We don't have that. This is really going to help us better and manage our ports better and be more effectively efficient. So we're now starting what we call the next phase of working with that team to start putting in place better visibility and better controls. So if we go on to the next slide, MJ, I've just, I don't know why it hasn't built, but I think you've got to press it a few times. I don't know why there's animation on there, but effectively what we've done is to this just is a sample data. So this is not real data, and please don't use it as real data. But what we've said is, this is how we've laid out a control tower, is to understand what your loading schedule is, understanding what your transport schedule is and what capacities you have across that and all your movements, understand what your demand is. So it's always about your forward view, what is coming towards us, and then also saying, well, actually, against that forward view, what does my load versus demand looks like, and where are my bottlenecks that I have? Is it on transport, sea, road, and rail? Is it on storage capacity? And then having a summary at the end and trying to understand where those bottlenecks are, and then we can go off and solve those issues. So that's what we effectively use a control tower for. And a control tower normally looks across 3 different horizons. It looks like saying, what's happening today? We said the plan for today was to offload 1,000. Right, are we on track for that? Are we behind on that? And that can give you a real, operational indication on how well we're doing for that day. The second thing is to say, okay, what is the plan for the week? And do we have the right resources? Do we have the right contracts in place, etc., for the next week? And then the third part of that is looking further out, looking for over the next 21 days to say, right, based on what we can see coming towards us, the vessels coming in, the exports going out, do we have enough resources or capacity to actually deal with it? Because if we start flagging it 2 or 3 weeks before, at least we can do something rather than trying to do it when we physically there and then in the moment. So it's about being what we call giving you the visibility to help making decisions and move from what we call reacting to be more proactive in terms of doing that. So hopefully that just gives you a quick summary of what we've been through and how a control tower can use to help you when you have so many moving parts.
Thanks, Jeremy. Questions? Comments are also welcome.
So James, just coming back to you, I mean, you talked about obviously not having I think containers or equipment stuck in the port. Do you get any feedback or visibility saying, yes, it's stuck because of X reason, it's going to be 5 days before it's released, or how does that work, being a customer?
So from our perspective, it was a case of there's riots on the N3, and talking to our transport company regarding saying, guys, we assume you've stopped transporting our machines. Please keep us informed on a daily basis to ensure that the cargo is safe before you start moving it. I probably one bit of clarity from my side is I'm in a capital goods environment in terms of large mining and earth moving construction style machines. Okay. So they're nice big targets. They move extremely slowly on the back of trucks, but because the volumes are obviously a bit lower, it's easier to manage with the transport company saying you've got 20 machines stuck in the harbor from vessels that have come in. We're not happy that the N3 is safe for you to operate. We'll be holding back for another day or so, and then we'll reevaluate. Yep. But I think the reality is we probably didn't lose as much time as we might have thought we were going to.
Okay. That's good to hear. I suppose some of the challenges that obviously we had was there was quite a lot of perishable goods that were going through, and that's where we had a lot of the issues. And it was trying to say, okay, once you have that visibility and you know where your bottlenecks are, it's then about how you prioritize that, because in the past we just offloaded or picked a vessel as we felt we should, and we just offloaded it rather than actually trying to prioritize something. So with this visibility, we started to now talk about prioritization.
Yeah. So you're right, in terms of perishable goods, what this does really bring home is that we look at supply chain as holistic, but there are so many different industries that we operate in where the impacts are so different and so varied. It really becomes difficult to, let's say, aggregate at a very high level, or it's a very different thing for me maybe versus what Vasu was experiencing.
Yeah.
And from a SAFEX perspective, I think, just as an illustration of that, for years and years and years, we've been talking to SAF, we've been talking to SILT, we've been talking to all the people, RFA, SAIPA, all the people who've traditionally been involved in the logistics area, as to how can we collaborate and bring everybody together who all form part of the supply chain. And it's always been yes, fine. And everybody's still continued to work to a degree in silos. And the biggest positive of all of this is that it has this case in point is a classic example of everybody in adversity pulling together to try to create something that really will make a difference to the national economy at the end of the day. And if we can keep this example and flash it around every now and again that we forget, and we go back into our siloed mentality, then it will have achieved something even just in my world. So imagine what the potential is in the bigger world of it all.
Just a comment on that. I think, Jenny, I mean, we play really in the not in the I call it not in the FMCG space. It's really the industrial goods. And my history, I've always been in that space. And you speak about collaboration. We realized very early in the crisis that one of the advantages, one of the way to get around this, one of our defense mechanism was in fact collaboration, and that from basic information sharing to the kind of sources of information and bringing it together was very haphazard, certainly in our space. And I tried to reach out to some of the colleagues, certainly, and the guys I know personally, and I must admit I was quite saddened by the lack of firstly wanting to. And I think you and I have had chats about that before. Unfortunately, some of the people, some of the folk just still see it very in insular format, and we're in this together and we're going to do it, to the point where, I mean, even in time of crisis, some of the guys weren't seeing the need for collaboration. Well, so despite our best efforts. So I think some of the retailers maybe in certain aspects do it well, but certainly my limited efforts to try and get that done in our space, it's just those automotive companies, those spares companies, they just either were sitting at home and shut down the supply chain and said we closed for business. And I'm happy to say we didn't take that approach. We wanted to stay operating. We had some critical stuff which we need to get out to ESCOM and the like. So, the point of what I'm trying to say is that even in this crisis, unfortunately, some people didn't still see the value in collaboration.
Yeah, collaboration is one thing. Co-opetition is the thing everyone's talking about, because then there's money, shared revenue concern. Some people don't seem to be able to understand that collaboration can have long-term benefits as well to the bottom line. So it's all part of education, and let's hope we don't have another crisis that we need to be able to make people understand that.
I think it's encouraging that what Jeremy's just shown us, that at that level they are already seeing the light, and that's very encouraging. And I do hope the Port of Cape Town, Gqeberha, that they all do this type of thing, because this is not just for when there's a crisis. This is something that a business should be doing all the time, whether it's a port. It can also be a retailer who's saying, okay, how much demand do I have? Do I have enough supply? And doing that balancing, doing the proper sales and operations planning process to make sure that you have your business under control. Because, an event like this obviously has a huge impact, but you can, unfortunately, you can't anticipate it, but you can react in a smart way. So I really do hope that the fact that this team has decided that the control tower is the way to go. And I know in the public health sector, they also have the control tower concept. I think in the previous SAPEX conferences, they presented about the visibility of the network. But the thing is sustaining it, keeping it going. And I'm glad to hear from Jeremy that it wasn't just for now, but they're actually seeing the value for the future as well. And that's the key.
And having the right data to input and having the right information. So it all goes back to the collection of the data.
Yeah. Often master data is, rubbish in, rubbish out. We all know that. Anyone else from a different type of industry who had some sort of experiences and wants to tell us how they managed it? I can imagine that I know there's someone here who had that experience, but if you think of the medical aid that had to deal with the whole crisis, the COVID crisis, when there was the shutdown, they all had to go home. But not everybody has a laptop. Not everybody has internet, believe it or not. And that all had to be set up very quickly. So I think that is, again, Jenny, talking about opportunities and positive things coming out of all these events, is that companies that have been thinking about doing that type of thing all of a sudden had to do it within a week, which normally takes years. So you'll find, and that is, as we all know, has changed the complete landscape of how we work and how we most likely will also work in the future, and how employees will be doing it differently. Has anyone in this call experienced that, where they had to send their employees home and they had to change the way they worked in their business?
Well, I suppose it's got very little to do with the current unrest. But I mean, I technically have been working at home pretty much since the beginning of COVID. My team has technically been working at home pretty much since the beginning of COVID. I think during one of the level ones, we were probably going back into the office 1 day a week. And then as soon as the lockdowns started extending and the levels went up again, we've effectively just stopped. So the last time I was in an office was probably in about February. I guess from that perspective, we're very fortunate to have a system and a backbone that allows us to do that. And also with the level of staff that have to be on sites, obviously receiving machines, assembling machines, dispatching machines, it's probably been a lot more unfair on them having a physical job to do versus a keyboard job. But I think we've been very fortunate from that perspective. It's been relatively well controlled, even though the new Delta variant has started to cause some havoc on that side in terms of physical staff on the ground as well.
I think in your example, Jeremy, I mean, this was all done through teleconferences, right? We were all on Zoom or Microsoft Office talking to each other, and still managed to pull this together. So I think the innovation and the creativity that has had to be prevalent now in the new environment that we're in, that even with this event that happened, the looting, we were able to pull something together, and we're all sitting basically at home, except for obviously the people at the ports that have to use the machinery to unload.
Absolutely, but I think well, I won't say it's fortunate because of COVID, but COVID has made us do things a very different way. And what we're saying is what is the new norm, because we're not going to go back to the old way of working. Everyone is going to be working in different ways. We see this in every single industry at the moment happening. And just to give some examples from what we do, we've done 3 SAP implementations 100% remotely. 100% remotely SAP implementation. We've done 4 supply chain, full business transformation, including organizational design, also consultations, and a number of tools implementation, all 100% remotely. So yes, the question comes back is do we need to travel? So where is that happy medium? And lots of businesses are now realizing to say, you know what, we don't need all our people in the office all the time. And there's a lot of big companies now that have said what they're going to do is they're going to have core days. So you, as a function, you will need to be in the office maybe once or twice a week when you have a core day for core meetings or core things to happen. But those other three or 4 other days, that means you're away. And how they're doing it is they're starting to streamline it, is that function by function gets a different day in the office, which means the offices can be 5 times smaller than they currently are. So you do need that human interaction, but I think we're not going to go back to the same way of doing things, to the extent now that number of countries are now doing, doctors are doing all their consultations remotely. And I was speaking to a couple of radiologists recently, and they said they've been trying to do all their reading of X-rays remotely, and it was never allowed because of security and all the concerns. Overnight, that's changed, and just about everyone who's a radiologist now around the world does all their X-ray reading at home. There's no reason why they have to be in a hospital or surgery or wherever they need to be. So you just see every single profession now. As James's point was, there's certain things that you still need to be in certain places to do things, but the world has now changed. This is what we call a reset. And they also talk about this, they use quite a lot of examples now of what happened after the First World War and what happened after the Second World War, because when you went into those wars, the way of working, the way of doing things was very different from when you came out of the war. Now, obviously, this isn't a war, or it might seem like one, which we've had last month, but effectively, we are coming out of those stages now that you will not go back to the same way of working.
Yeah, I mean, I just used an example of yesterday in that we had a webinar, and really 2 years ago, we were being asked to do webinars. And I think I've used this example over and over again, where Tonya and I have sat there and go, no, it's too expensive. No, it's too scary. No, we don't know how to do it. And in the last 18 months, I think we've done a webinar almost every day. But yesterday we were able at fairly short notice to get somebody from Ethiopia to talk to us about the chemotherapy supply chains. And we had people from Jordan, Kenya, Ethiopia, South Africa, England. We had about 12 different countries midweek for an hour. We would never have done that ever. So for us, the SAPICS community really truly is a global community, and we won't ever go back to that. But will our other existing revenue stream, i.e. the annual conference, suffer as a result? And these are all the sort of questions that are running through our minds at the moment. And yes, offices are hugely affected. We have everybody working from home, and they have done for 18 months, and only a few come into the office every now and again, and it's more for when they need internet and when they need a bit of company.
Okay, well, that was what we wanted to show you today. I hope it was interesting. It was insightful. Thanks so much also for being here. It's all about rebuilding, reshaping, and showing resilience. And I have to say, and I said it every time I was on TV, I tried to squeeze it in there just to say thank you to all the supply chain professionals, because I think everyone in the supply chain environment has had everything turned upside down and have shown that they're able to manage. I mean, we saw the shelves being filled up a day or two after they were emptied. But talking to, you know, what we've just been discussing, reshaping, right? Doing things differently, re-looking at what we've always done. You know, if we keep doing the same of the same, we're going to get the same, right? It's our friend Albert Einstein. And having resilience. And I think the supply chains have shown they do have resilience, but it's also about being prepared as to not having to go down that route. And that's the example that Jeremy showed of having a control tower, having it even when there isn't a crisis, always having one, so that you have full transparency. And then when you do have a crisis, you can be very quick in understanding what's happening in your environment.
And MJ, to your point about, you know, thanking supply chain professionals, etc., I think something that had for me has highlighted this is the whole Pingate scenario in the UK, where key workers who had got an app, you know, this app that pings people, and they have to go into self-isolation because they've been in contact with someone who's COVID positive, and the effect that that's had on the supply chain in the UK. For me, that just illustrates the sheer importance of the people who manage the supply chains. So we can be as clever as we like, and the control towers are wonderful, but if there's no one to read them and there's no one to react to it, then it's all a bit of a waste of time until the robots really do come and take over the world.
Well, that's the thing. I think, you know, supply chain, we always talk a lot about digitizing. Digitizing doesn't mean that we don't have people. I think people get very confused about that. Digitizing is to help you focus on the things that are important. So you don't look at everything or all your products. You look at the ones that need to be managed. You look at the exceptions. You look at the events. And that's really what's important. So we will never not need to be people. And I was looking at the Economic Forum. They did a survey and sent out a report of which jobs are still going to be around in 20 years. So I was trying to help my niece decide what she should study. And I said to her, study supply chain. We'll always need supply chain people and psychiatrists. I think the mental health side of it is also not to be underestimated. But supply chain is here to stay, and we do need the people, yes.
Yep, absolutely.
So SAPEX is a great environment for everyone to get help. You know, we're all here. So if anyone needs help or needs some guidance, or you know, their staff needs to be upskilled, SAPEX is really the place to go.
Even mental health, we can try and help with.
Yeah, we can tell a joke. Yeah, we can
tell a joke here or there. No. In all seriousness, we are here, and we've got access to brilliant minds like Jeremy, like MJ, like yourselves, all of you who are experts in your own field. And that's where I feel so privileged. Every day I get asked by somebody, do you know, can you help? And there's always somebody who can and does help. So big thanks to all of you, and thank you very, very much. Particular thanks to MJ, who literally, she took over the role of president at the end of or middle of July, end of July or end of June, and really dropped everything during that week or the last 2 weeks to talk to intelligent media, not media, people who thought they knew everything about supply chain, and by the end of the discussion with her realized they knew nothing about supply chain, and she did all of it with great skill and aplomb. So great representation of SAPEX, and we're very, very grateful to you and to Jeremy for dropping everything to help the ports and the people who manage them and the people who needed them during this time of crisis. And let's hope it leads to something great. So to all of you, thank you very much for joining us. And I hope that if you haven't registered for the conference already, that you will register for the conference. It is in a very short space of time ahead of us. It's from the 24th to the 26th of August. We've got an incredible program of speakers, some familiar, some new, some technical, some sort of about people, skills development, panel discussions. It is every bit, the program is every bit as good as a face-to-face conference, if not, I don't know, maybe a little bit better, because we're able to bring people in from further afield. Claire's put a link in the chat for the registration process. We're going to use the floor again, so hopefully you'll be able to get some networking. That's the platform that we used last year. It's got some really innovative tweaks and stuff to it. Floor networking sessions like this, you can have little table chats with 6 people, set up meetings, all that sort of, everybody's done an online event this year, not like last year where they hadn't done it. So we're looking forward to it. We're bored of online. We must say we are looking forward to being able to see you all face to face, but if we can't do that, this is the next best thing. So from all of us to all of you, thank you for your support and keeping the country going, really. And if anyone doesn't have anything else to say, the slides will be shared, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event.
Thanks, everyone.
Great.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, MJ, Jeremy.
Pleasure,
Pleasure.
anytime.
Nice seeing you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.